Hey there everyone, my name is Golden Preciado. It's my pleasure to share with you this presentation, how to transition your band or worship team to in-ear monitors. I want to direct your attention to the QR code in the corner of my screen. The QR code leads to a document which includes the class outline and other helpful links and resources. All right. There are various reasons why one might choose to transition to in-ear monitors. For many of you that are here today, it's become a requirement that you use in-ear monitors. Houses of worship and various other event venues have noise guidelines that must be followed. Or perhaps you are a band that has decided to travel with their own in-ear monitor rig and signal split so that you can experience consistency wherever you play. Whatever your reason may be, transitioning from floor wedges to in-ear monitors is a process that requires time and adjustment, particularly if you have only ever used wedges. Many musicians, singers, and worship leaders have shared with me their experiences of being abruptly introduced to in-ear monitors, resulting in such a negative experience that they are reluctant to ever try them again. Now, as both a musician and singer myself, I have personally navigated the transition to in-ear monitors, and I totally get it. I understand the challenges performers face during this process. I'm also an experienced audio engineer, so my hope is that my perspective from both sides of the stage will allow me to provide valuable guidance for your whole team. And when I say team, I mean the musicians, vocalists, and audio techs. All of you will be involved in this transition to in-ear monitors. I want to assure you that with proper preparation and adaptation, it is not only possible to transition smoothly to in-ear monitors, but also to have a vibrant, live, and inspirational experience. So, let's dive in. All right. I want to get you excited about the benefits of using in-ear monitors. So, let's start with the benefits for the musicians and vocalists on stage. Personal control. For the musician, perhaps the most empowering part of in-ear monitoring is having direct control over what they hear. If you want more of something, turn it up. If you want less of something, turn it down. And you know what? None of the other musicians need to know that you didn't want to hear them. No hard feelings. Reduced vocal strain. When singers can't hear themselves over the stage mix, which often happens with floor monitors, they tend to push their voices too hard, ultimately damaging their vocal cords. In-ear personal monitors allows the singer to hear themselves clearly and distinctly without having to belt to overcome the stage noise. Elimination of feedback. Feedback happens when amplified sound from a loudspeaker, most often a floor monitor, is picked up by a microphone and re-amplified. In-ear monitors make this scenario moot since they seal the loudspeakers in your ears, breaking the feedback loop. Freedom of movement. With floor monitors, if you walk outside the coverage area of the loudspeaker, you will lose your reference and no longer hear yourself. With in-ear monitors, wherever you go, wherever you walk to, your monitor mix stays with you. Option to play with tracks, click, and cues. Playing with multi-tracks is a super popular and valuable tool for enhancing the sound of your band. You can add layers of sound that might be difficult to reproduce live, such as orchestral elements, maybe keyboards and ambient pads, or additional vocal harmonies. But you can only take advantage of this if you're using in-ear monitors, so the band can play together with the click track. Now, let's look at some of the benefits for the audience and the person running front of house. Optimal volume levels. Floor monitors often result in volume wars between the amplified and the unamplified. Singers, acoustic guitarists, and keyboardists can't hear themselves over the amplified electric guitars and bass, let alone the drums. So they ask, can you turn me up? Within your personal monitors, it's possible to achieve studio quality sound in a live sound context, and the musician can choose what they want to hear. Clean audience mix. Provided there are no blaring guitars and bass amps facing the audience, and the guy in the acoustic drum kit is playing appropriately for the size of the room, in-ear monitors create a reduced stage volume, allowing the front-of-house engineer considerable control of the house mix. The engineer is no longer dealing with muddy sound being thrown off the stage from loud floor monitors. He or she can contour a beautiful sounding present mix without overwhelming the room with excessive volume. And in a space with hard surfaces, using in-ear monitors will solve about 70% of issues with intelligibility. Okay, now that I have sung the praises of the benefits of using in-ear monitors, let's take a look at some of the challenges that musicians and vocalists face. The following is a list of comments I frequently hear from those who tried using in-ear monitors or those having to use them in a less than optimal situation. And just to let you know, I am one of those musicians who have made some of these comments at some time in the past. I'm just going to read these statements with a pause in between each one, and you can reflect on these struggles as you relate to them. I feel cut off from the audience. I can't get my mix right. Everything is muddy and I can't discern the individual instruments. It sounds way too dry. My earbuds keep falling out. I can't hear enough bass in my in-ear monitors. I have to have one ear in and the other out. Now, I know there are more struggles that you may face than I have listed here. The reason I've listed some of these challenges is because I know that they are real. And we're going to address all of these and more as we discuss strategies for making the transition to in-ear monitors. The most important thing to know about transitioning to in-ear monitors is that it's a commitment. It's a commitment of technical resources, as you may be adding new gear to accommodate the in-ear environment. And new gear means that there will be a financial commitment. There will be a time commitment as the team learns how to reference this new environment. Hey, Rome wasn't built in a day. It may take several practice sessions for musicians and vocalists to adjust and experiment. But the deciding factor in making a successful transition to in-ear monitors is the commitment to have a positive mindset and attitude. This means being open-minded, willing to adapt and embrace change. It means exercising patience, as there will be a learning curve and some trial and error in order to get the settings that work best for you. It means focusing on the long-term benefits and viewing the transition as an investment to improve your performance, or an investment in your ministry, or your band's future success. It means having a problem-solving attitude, being ready to tackle challenges as they arise, and not having an I give up attitude. It means being flexible and willing to experiment with different settings and configurations to find out what works best for your specific needs. I can't stress enough how important it is to keep a positive mindset and attitude. I frequently work with musicians who say something like, I tried them once and it was awful. I will never use them again. These people will never succeed in making the transition to in-ear monitors, even if they're forced to use them, because they've already decided not to commit mentally. A successful transition to in-ear monitors starts in the mind. When it comes to choosing the right earbuds, you can choose between universal fit or custom molded. I personally own both the models represented here. Universal fit earbuds are more economical, but I found that they can be uncomfortable. When you buy a pair of earbuds, they usually come with various sizes of rubber or foam tips. You'll want to experiment to discover which version forms the best seal without popping out of your ear. When dealing with universal fit earbuds, I have found that the expanding foam tips will create a better seal than the rubber versions. Squeeze them to insert them into your ear, then hold them there until the foam fully expands, creating the seal. You'll want to exchange them for new ones each month as they will become rigid over time. If you're using rubber tips, your in-ear monitors will have come with different sizes. Experiment with each size to see which will stay in the ear canal the best. In some cases, you may use one size in one ear and another size in the other ear. To insert the rubber tips, drop your jaw, push them in, and then close your mouth. If none of the universal fit earbuds are working for you, you may need to consider custom molds. If you're going to regularly spend many hours wearing in-ear monitors, then the sheer comfort of custom molded housings, as shown in the picture on the right, is definitely worth the investment. The process involves making an appointment with an audiologist to have some impressions made of your ear canal. They inject this goopy material into your ear canal to create a hardened mold. Then it's removed and then used to shape the custom ear molds. This can be done with a digital scan as well, but I've personally had a better result when my molds were made from the goopy stuff. Another advantage of custom molds is acoustic isolation. Custom molded earpieces actually fit snugly in the outer ear, allowing the housing itself to bolster their isolation in ways universal fit in-ear monitors can't provide. I not only use my custom molded earbuds for performing or leading worship, I also use them for live broadcast mixing at the music venue I work at. I am mixing the house and a dedicated broadcast mix on a separate pair of buses at the same time. The house volume is very loud, and I have found that my custom molded in-ear monitors are the only option that provide enough isolation to clearly hear my broadcast mix. Custom molded earbuds are quite expensive, so you'll definitely want to factor that in as you're choosing your earbuds. But as the saying goes, a musician is someone who loads $5,000 worth of gear into a $500 car to drive 100 miles to a $50 gig. How many drivers are enough? Drivers are the tiny little components inside the in-ear monitors that convert electrical signals into sound waves. They are essentially tiny speakers that produce the audio you hear when using in-ear monitors. So, how many drivers are enough? Well, this will depend on your application. With standard single driver in-ears, the burden of recreating the entire frequency spectrum rests squarely on one driver. Now, there are some impressive single driver models out there, but the fact is that there's only so much a single driver can do, resulting in a limited frequency range, usually lacking in the low end. Vocalists and acoustic guitarists might be completely happy with single driver earbuds. But as you step up to more drivers, each one is separated by a passive crossover, allowing one driver to power a smaller portion of the frequency spectrum. The more drivers that are packed into an earbud means better overall efficiency of each individual driver. Even if they cover the same frequency range, every additional driver distributes the workload more broadly, allowing each to function more optimally. In-ear monitors with 3 to 6 or even 8 drivers deliver deeper lows. This is a top priority for bass players and drummers. More drivers also allows for clearer highs and more articulate mids than you'll get from earbuds with only 1 or 2 drivers. Let's take a look at how to wear your in-ear monitors. Unlike the earbuds that you might use with your phone or computer, where the wire hangs straight down from the ear, in-ear monitor earbuds are worn differently. Here's a quick video on how to wear them.
Step 1. Bring your in-ear monitors across your back. Check to make sure the right and the left are on the correct side, and ideally, feed the cable down the back of your shirt or your cool worship leader jacket. Step 2. Hang your monitors over your ears. And step 3, insert your monitor into your ears using the inner arch as the secure backstop for the monitor. Go ahead and give it a little wiggle, make sure it's in there good. And here's the secret to making sure your in-ear monitors never fall out. A lot of people don't know that this little slidey thing is supposed to slide up all the way up to your head. That way any tugs on the cable won't cause your in-ear monitors to come out. Check that out, you can pull that thing pretty hard and it ain't going anywhere.
All right, let's talk about some options for setting up your in-ear monitor system. As I go through these options, be thinking about what gear you already have and what you might be willing to expand on. Some options are more cost-intensive than others, so you'll want to consider that as well. First option, run your in-ear monitors from a separate mixing console. This option provides the most control over all aspects of dialing in the individual mixes, as all processing is completely separated from the front of house console. This option does, however, require an experienced engineer dedicated to running the monitor mixes. Good monitor engineers can anticipate your needs before you ask for changes because they are constantly cueing or listening in on your mix. When managed by an excellent engineer, this option is the least work-intensive for the band. I must mention, however, if the monitor engineer is not experienced, there is the possibility that it can be a very difficult challenge. You'll normally see this configuration run with a wireless system, including transmitters and packs for each musician. For music venues and churches that have the financial resources and experienced audio engineers on a regular basis, this is an elegant way to manage in-ear monitors. The next option is for the musician and vocalist to have control of their own monitor mix via personal monitor mixers. In this setup, the individual channel signals are most often transmitted digitally from the front of house board via a network cable like Cat5 or Cat6 to the personal monitor mixers. Each musician plugs their earbuds into their own mixer, then they can adjust their own mix, including volume, panning, grouping of instruments, and some models even allow you to EQ each individual channel. There are several brands and models out there. Many digital mixer manufacturers offer personal monitor mixers as optional accessories to complement their main mixer. This option seems to be the most popular method in houses of worship, since the worship team is generally stationary. Each personal monitor mixer can be a bit pricey, but it's worth the investment. The next option is definitely the most cost-effective, but nevertheless, a convenient way to handle your in-ear monitors. Have the musicians and vocalists mix their own in-ear monitors via a tablet or their phone. Most digital mixer manufacturers have apps that allow the user remote control of their mix. Now, in this scenario, each device is connected to the front of house console via Wi-Fi. The audio signal is routed out of the mix buses of the console and connected to either transmitters, so the musicians can have wireless in-ear monitors, or to personal headphone amplifiers, in which case the musician would plug their earbuds directly into the headphone box. Band members will have control of individual channel volumes and panning. However, in this configuration, generally the musician will not have personal control of processing, for example, EQ, compression, and gates, because they are shared with the main mix. This is footage of one of my setups at Campus Jacks, the music venue I work at. When a band requests in-ear monitor mixes, I like to have iPads ready for each band member with their assigned mixes already attached to their mic stands before they arrive. It makes Soundcheck run smoothly, and I can concentrate more on the front of house and broadcast mix. I actually adopted this workflow from a few churches that I worked at. These churches had chosen to purchase tablets dedicated to the worship team to run their in-ear monitors. The Soundcheck would set them up before they arrived and then put them away in the charging station when everything was finished. This way, the devices were always ready to go and connected to the mixer. At Campus Jacks, many of the tribute bands I run sound for bring their own in-ear monitor system with their own mixer and signal split for the house. This helps the band to maintain consistency with their monitor mixes wherever they go. Each band member whips out their tablet or phone, connects to their mixer, and dials in their own mix. And all I have to do is think about the house mix. It's pretty cool. So, as you've been listening to these methods, you've probably narrowed down one that might best suit your application and available resources. I would suggest working with a professional and experienced audio engineer and/or integrator, if need be, to set up and configure your in-ear monitor system. Trust me, it will save you a lot of time and frustration. As we discuss these best practices, I'll be focusing on in-ear monitor configurations 2 and 3, where the musician is mixing their own in-ear monitors from either a personal monitor mixer or a tablet. Most houses of worship and bands who transition to in-ear monitors will be using either one of these methods. Let's talk about what's necessary for your setup on stage. First things first, mic everything and plug in anything that can be plugged into a direct box. Why, you might ask? A novice performer or audio tech might make the comment, "I can already hear everything just fine. It doesn't need a mic." Well, here's why. In-ear monitors, when inserted properly, create a seal in your ear blocking out most of the room noise, in essence, creating an entirely isolated listening environment from the house. In order to properly mix the nuances of each instrument in your ears, you will need individual channel control of each instrument. Microphones and direct boxes are like ears that capture the sound of each instrument. Mic each drum, mic your electric guitar amps, plug in your acoustic guitars and keyboards, mic your acoustic piano, mic your percussion if you have it, and so on. Not all mic'd instrument channels need to be used in the house mix if it's unnecessary, but the option to use them in in-ear monitor mixes is essential. Next best practice, set up audience mics. Typically, these should be condenser mics, but if you don't have any extra condensers in your available resources, any dynamic mic like an SM57 will work as well. Position the mics at the front of the stage, one on the left and one on the right, facing the audience. Mount the mics at a height that avoids picking up too much direct sound from the PA system. Depending on the height of your stage, you may want to angle them slightly downward towards the audience. Remember that frustrated musician who says, "I feel cut off from the audience"? This helps capture the crowd's reactions and ambient noise and helps musicians feel more connected to the audience. Audience mics can also pick up sounds from the stage, helping musicians communicate better with each other. Here's a few tips at the mixer for your audience mics. Tip 1. Make sure you unassign the audience mics from your main mix. If you don't, and you inadvertently bring up those faders, you'll be looking at a feedback disaster. Tip 2. The EQ on your audience mics should look something like this. I have my low cut roll-off starting at around 260 Hertz and a high cut starting at 6K. The goal of your audience mics is to capture crowd reaction and participation. That happens in about this range. This EQ will help get rid of any unnecessary noise that might interfere with the in-ear mixes. Now, I want to discuss a few mixing tips for the audio tech. What happens at the mixing console is a very extensive subject. We could spend hours discussing EQ and mixing techniques, but today I want to highlight two aspects that will have a huge impact on cleaning up your mix, not only for your in-ear monitor users, but for your house mix as well. Establish a healthy input gain. If your input meters are bouncing around at a low level, like this, that's not healthy. We need them to be bouncing around at a level like this, somewhere around unity. The input gain is the first component of the signal chain once the signal enters the mixing console. Depending on the manufacturer of your mixer, this could also be referred to as trim, head amp, or preamp gain. The topic of gain structure is a lengthy one, and there are some great tutorials on this. But as it relates to in-ear monitors, establishing a healthy input gain at the mixing console is crucial for several reasons. Proper input gain ensures that the audio signal is strong enough compared to the noise level. If the gain is set too low, the noise can become prominent, leading to a hissy or dirty mix. And for those of us using in-ear monitors, we can hear all the nuances of dirty sounding channels quite clearly. When the input levels are correctly set, it becomes easier to manage the overall mix, ensuring that no signal input overwhelms the other. Not only for front of house, but for those of us using in-ear monitors as well. Proper input gain makes it easier to make accurate adjustments during mixing. So, go find your input gain knob on your mixer and adjust the input gain for each channel until it's at a healthy level. Next mixing tip for the audio tech. Use your high pass filter. On some mixers, this will be called low cut. This is an important EQ tool. If you never learn anything else about EQ, learn how to use this one tool. A high pass filter, often abbreviated HPF, allows the signal above a selected frequency to pass through unaffected while removing the signal below that frequency, which would be the low frequency sounds. You'll find yourself using high pass filters on the majority of your input channels. Setting your high pass filters will automatically create a great deal of clarity and intelligibility as it eliminates extraneous noise, for example, HVAC, or stage volume and other ambient low-end noise from being unnecessarily amplified. So, where do you set your high-pass filter? Well, when you look at the high-pass filter control on your mixer, it wants to know what frequency you want to start the low-cut roll-off. Frequencies are really just notes. Mixing consoles call them frequencies, musicians call them notes. So, in general, you can start by setting your high-pass filter to the lowest note that an instrument is capable of producing. If you don't know what the low-end range of an instrument is, you can use a frequency chart like this one, where it lists the note, the corresponding frequency number, and the instrument. Or you can just ask your AI. And the conversation with your AI will go something like this. Hey there, my all-knowing best friend AI. What is the lowest note or frequency of an acoustic guitar? AI says, boom, I got my answer. I can set my high-pass filter for an acoustic guitar at 82 Hertz. Now, some instruments like piano or keyboards are full-range instruments, so you'll have a little different conversation with your AI. You might ask, what is the best starting high-pass filter for a keyboard? AI says, boom, 80 to 100 Hertz. And your best friend AI will give you other helpful information as well if you're interested. Now, these are great starting points for your high-pass filters. But as you're listening to your house mix, if you hear that certain instruments are fighting for the same low-end frequency space, you can raise the high-pass filter on the instrument or vocal that's making things sound muddy. Because EQ processing will be shared between the main mix and the in-ear monitor mixes, it's important to use your high-pass filter to create better clarity and intelligibility for everyone. I've written several helpful articles on the topic of EQ. The links are in the class notes when you scan the QR code. Okay, so now we're back on stage with the musicians and vocalists. Let's talk about your in-ear listening environment. But first, let's talk about how our brains process audio. We naturally hear sounds in a three-dimensional spatial environment. We can perceive when we hear something to our left or to our right. We can hear when coming from above or is at our feet. Hearing in a 3D spatial environment allows us to easily delineate different sounds, and then our brains can help us choose what sound we want to focus on. As it relates to in-ear monitors, there are 3 listening environment options available to us on the market today. The 3D, or immersive listening environment, the 2D, stereo listening environment, and then the 1D mono listening environment. The 3D option, or immersive in-ear monitoring solution, available on ultra-high-end pro audio consoles, is a cost-intensive one, and suffice it to say, not many of us will have the pleasure of performing in this in-ear environment. All other mixing consoles, however, will allow us to listen to our in-ear mixes in either stereo or mono. So, for the rest of us, the best and most natural way to listen to your in-ear mix is in stereo. Listening in stereo allows one to easily delineate different sounds because you can spread out the instruments in varying degrees from the left to the right over a 2D spatial field. If you're using personal in-ear monitor mixers, it will already be configured in a stereo format. If you're receiving your in-ear mix straight from the outputs of the console and using a tablet, the mix buttons will need to be linked into a stereo configuration at the console. Some consoles will come with a few stereo mixes already configured for you. We'll talk more about mixing in stereo in a bit. Okay, let's take a look at the mono listening environment. This is a mix coming from one channel instead of 2 channels, as was the case in our stereo configuration. If you have the resources available to set up stereo mixes for everyone, then I would highly recommend that. A mono listening environment is not optimal. In this setup, all the instruments and vocals are mixed straight up the center. Our brains weren't created to naturally process audio in this manner, which makes mono in-ear monitoring a little more difficult to get used to. However, mono in-ear mixes often become a necessity due to the lack of outputs available on certain mixing consoles, In fact, in my experience, I've observed the majority of churches and bands who use in-ear monitors are referencing mono mixes. The good news is that it's absolutely possible to make the mono listening environment work for you. And we'll get back to this in a bit. Can anyone tell me what's wrong with this picture? A common practice among many musicians using in-ear monitors, especially those referencing a mono mix, is to leave one ear in and the other out. They do this so they can hear the ambient noise around them. But this is an unhealthy practice and contributes to hearing loss over time. Musicians who do this will tend to run their volume in that one ear 6 to 10 dB louder than if both earbuds were being used. Remember that a 10 dB increase in sound intensity means doubling the perceived loudness. To give yourself an idea of just how loud your earbud volume is, stick the other ear back in for a minute while the band is playing. This will be a good reality check, as it will be painfully loud. Let's talk about steps you can take to help ease the transition for your team. Make sure your in-ear monitor system is properly set up and configured before ever working with your band. If you're using personal in-ear monitor mixers, depending on the manufacturer, you'll need to program each button to a corresponding audio channel. And then you'll need to do this for each personal in-ear monitor mixer. Each band member gets their own personal monitor mixer. So if you have a big band, then this may take a bit of time. Test each one out to make sure you have it properly programmed. If you've decided to mix via tablets or phones with audio coming from the mixing console, make sure each device can easily be connected to the mixer. Make sure your in-ear monitor mixes on the console are properly configured. All in-ear monitor mixes should be set to pre-fader, not post-fader. If you're using wireless in-ear packs, test them all out. If you're using headphone preamps at each station, test each one out. Make sure you're getting signal on each unit. Configuring and troubleshooting your in-ear monitor system should not take place when the band is on stage ready to go. Now, I know I said this earlier in the presentation, but it bears repeating. If you've never configured a setup like this, work with an experienced professional audio engineer or integrator if needed. All too often, I see novice sound techs try to make something work that they have no training on or know nothing about, and only cause themselves major frustration. And then they need to end up hiring help anyway. Typically, transitioning from floor wedges to in-ears means you're changing from having a trained audio engineer create your mix to you having control over your own mix. However, without proper mix training, your results will be less than optimal. This just leads to a band full of disgruntled musicians. So, step 2, train your team well. I promise you the transition to in-ear monitors will fail unless there is deliberate training beforehand. Don't just take away all the floor monitors one day and expect everyone to suddenly get it. Spend time teaching your team all about the gear you'll be using. Schedule dedicated time outside of rehearsal and soundcheck to walk through the gear you have, and also spend time talking about how they can create their own customized mix. Walk through how to soundcheck with ears, how to dial in a great mix. Make adjustments to the mix. And if you're using personal in-ear monitor mixers, how to save the settings of their mix. If you have people on your team who are more experienced, pair them with less experienced team members to help support the training. If there are training videos online explaining your specific in-ear gear, share those videos to your team so they can review them beforehand and reference them after the initial training. If you have the time and resources, instead of Consider creating your own videos customized for your team, walking through the gear in the context of how you do things. Step 3, let's talk about how to mix in-ear monitors. Just because there is a musician or vocalist on stage doesn't automatically mean that they know how to mix their in-ear monitors. Essentially, they need to be taught how to be their own mix engineer. So, here's how you might teach them. Think of your mix as layers or levels of a pyramid. Start with yourself. Make sure you have enough of you in your in-ears. Work with your sound engineer to make sure that you have enough to get an accurate picture of what's happening at front of house. If your personal in-ear volume is too loud, you'll sing or play too softly because you're afraid you're too loud. If the volume in your ears is too soft, you'll oversing or play too loudly to compensate for the lack of volume. Get your level correct so you can somewhat match the dynamic of front of house. Next, make sure you have enough pitch and timing reference from the instruments. I suggest they should at least be equal to each other in volume, but lower in volume in your in-ears than you. For pitch, I like to choose an instrument that will always be in tune, for example, a keyboard, rather than an acoustic guitar. For timing, you can choose the click track if you're using it. If not, then kick, hi-hat, or snare will suffice. Now that you have enough of you and a good balance of timing and pitch reference, add complementary parts. If you're a singer, create a good blend of other singers. If you're a drummer, make sure you've got plenty of bass. If you are one of many guitarists on stage, make sure you've got plenty of the other players so you can blend parts well. Again, make sure they are less prominent in your mix than you and your primary pitch and timing reference instruments. Finally, add in everything else. Keep in mind, add only what you need to hear. Just because it's on stage doesn't mean you have to have it in your mix. Oftentimes, I find that adding extra parts quickly leads to a muddy mix. Oh, and make sure you can hear plenty of the leader or whoever is the primary vocalist, so you're always on the same page. If at all possible, use a stereo in-ear setup. The difference between a mono and stereo in-ear mix is similar to a movie that transitions from black and white to color. In stereo, you can hear things in a completely new way and have an even greater opportunity for clarity. Think of it this way. When you're mixing in mono, your means of adjusting each part is through volume exclusively. You can turn something up or down. When switching to a stereo in-ear mix, you now have panning control as well as volume. You can turn a sound up or down and move it left or right in the stereo field. Now you can create more space in your mix for each sound. So spreading out your instruments across the stereo field doesn't happen on its own. Remember, musicians and vocalists are learning how to be their own mix engineer. On a personal in-ear monitor mixer, you'll press the button that belongs to an instrument and then use the pan knob to move it to either the left or the right. If you're using a tablet, you'll tap to select the channel of a specific instrument and then use a slider to move that instrument either to the left or the right. This is a graphic representation of what panning might look like in a musician's in-ear mix. In general, instruments that will almost always be panned up the center would be your kick drum, snare, and bass. Other instruments that will most likely remain in the center are the instruments that the musician is playing and their vocal if they're singing. Other instruments can be panned at varying degrees to the left or the right to create a full and wide mix in your ears. Inputs that can be hard left-right would be your drum overhead mics, your audience mics, and stereo keyboards. But ultimately, where instruments are panned in a mix is up to the musician. so that they can have the best reference possible for themselves. This is something you'll want to experiment with. And here's a quick panning tip. If you're having trouble hearing a certain instrument or vocal, instead of turning it up in your ears, try panning it off to one side. You'll experience immediate delineation of that instrument or vocal. And here's one more advantage. By implementing panning, you're able to listen to a natural sounding mix. So you're more likely to listen at a lower volume. And this means healthier ears over the long haul. Now, many in-ear monitor users won't have the option to reference a stereo mix. So let's talk about how to mix in mono. Here's what happens in a mono in-ear mix. Everything becomes one big wall of sound mixed up the center with little distinction between instruments. The tendency and danger is for the musician to keep turning instruments up and up and up because they want to hear every instrument, detail, and nuance. Pretty soon, their mix is so loud, it becomes painful, and they're still not hearing a full mix. So, how does one make a mono in-ear mix work for them? When referencing a mono in-ear mix, it's best to add only what you absolutely need in order to play or sing well. You don't get to mix a record in your ears when you're working with a mono in-ear mix. Here's a graphic representation of what working with a mono mix might look like. The faded instruments represent those with less volume. The musician referencing this mix is a guitar player and vocalist. The guitar and vocal are the most forward in the mix. The other vocals are set somewhat under his own vocal, but there's just enough so that he can hear their harmonies. The only drum channels he needed were the kick and the hi-hat. And notice that they are set pretty far back in the mix. Adding all the other drum mics would have added too much extra noise that was not contributing to his reference. He has a small amount of other instruments in there with just enough audience mic level that he can hear what's going on in the room. Now, something I've noticed when I've had to work with a mono in-ear mix is that adding too much volume from condenser mics like drum overheads and audience mics tend to take away some of the clarity from my mix. For that reason, I will use condenser mics sparingly in my mono in-ear mix. All right. Well, when I was young and learning to play piano, my parents would tell me, practice, practice, practice. Well, when it comes to learning how to mix your in-ears, it takes practice, practice, practice. But the band may not want to play as long as it takes for you to practice mixing. Not a problem. These days, we can use a technique available to us on most digital mixers called virtual soundcheck. Virtual soundcheck involves recording a live performance or worship time. Each individual channel is recorded separately or multi-tracked. The tracks can then be played back through the sound system, including the in-ear monitor mixes. This way, one can practice mixing to their heart's content and the band doesn't even need to be there. Practicing your mixing skills in this manner will allow you to experiment with volume and panning placement. You can make adjustment after adjustment until you come up with an in-ear monitor reference that you're happy with. It's a good idea when you're practicing dialing in your mix that the house be playing back those tracks at the regular house volume at the same time, so that you're feeling and hearing a realistic overall environment in your in-ear mix. The most important element in making a successful transition from floor monitors to in-ear monitors is patience. For some, the transition may happen very quickly. For others, it may take a while to get used to this new listening environment. It may take several practices before someone feels comfortable using in-ear monitors in a live context. While you're making the transition, you might consider keeping floor monitors available for the first few times the band plays live. just in case someone melts down and needs it. With the understanding, of course, that eventually the floor monitors will be removed. Well, that's a wrap for this presentation. It's been a pleasure sharing with you. I'm Golden Preciado. Thank you for watching.